I was thinking about this the other day because I was recording some videos, and it's funny how many successful people I know, not that they're not successful, just like what people would describe as successful, are so afraid of the camera. Like as soon as the camera gets in front of them, they're so afraid.
Yes, I get it.
It's like new stuff though, right?
Yeah.
Like I think there's a lot of people, they get into a flow, they get confidence in how things were, and then shaking that up's hard.
You know what I realized
Yeah.
is that I am so used to being on Zoom calls all day, every day, that I actually do extremely well just looking at my own face. Like it's the vainest thing in the world, but I can record content for hours if it's just me looking at me, watching me do it.
Totally.
But as soon as I'm talking to just like a camera, there's no face on the other end, I freeze. It's so weird.
That's so funny. I feel like I should have put like a mirror in front of myself so you could.
That's right. Like honestly, we could try that.
I don't know what it is. When I was making the video, I was like, I wanted to call everyone like wimps. I'm like, you're so successful, you should not be afraid of actually recording shit. And then I like, you put a camera on and it's like, dude, did you just like forget everything you know about the world?
Yeah, well, here we are. Okay, so couple topics I'm excited to chat about.
Yeah.
So what is your team not telling you? I was chatting with a client today, and when we come in and we do these operational audits, we're interviewing the team directly. And under the cone of silence and confidentiality, their teams are telling us all this crazy shit, all their frustrations, all of their points of concern, all their anger, the fact that they're about to quit, they're looking for other job. And when we present our findings to the founders, it is always a surprise. They're like, I had no idea that this was happening. I had no idea my team felt this way. I had no idea that this ticking time bomb was about to go off in my business. How did I not know? And it hits me every time because these are the things that as founders take us by surprise, cost us so much time and energy, right? That person that unexpectedly quits, or that mistake that you have to unearth by going through and auditing things, that client fire that appears out of nowhere. These are the things that cost us time and growth. And our team knows about them. They know about all of them. They're just not telling us.
It stops them from saying something.
Right. At the root cause, it's psychological safety, right? I don't feel safe speaking up. I don't feel like I can go to my boss and tell them that I'm thinking about looking for another job. Fair. That makes sense. But how do we as leaders, number one, create an environment where the things that drove them to want to quit, they were telling us about that months ago. We were working with them to build a game plan on how to fix that issue months ago so that they never get to the point feeling like they need to quit in the first place. And then if they are, right, like I've had people leave my team, but it's always a conversation. They're coming to me and saying, here's specifically what is either not working for me, and then we figure out, okay, there's nothing we can do about that, or here is where I need to grow next. And we identify that the company can't grow with them to wherever they're trying to go. But it's always a conversation. 1, 2, 3 months of prep work go into, cool, we've looked at every solution. We've tried to solve this. We've identified it that we can't. So it is time for you to move on. But though I have 3 months to prep, I have 3 months to find a replacement. I have 3 months to fix the issue. I have 3 months of knowing that this problem exists in my business so that I'm able to proactively work on it and it doesn't slow me down or cost me money. And so the way that I'm able to make that happen is psychological safety. I spend so much time, number one, being vulnerable in front of my team, telling them where I'm not sure, where I have doubts, where I'm confused, where I made a mistake, where I see myself failing, so that they feel comfortable bringing that to the table. And then number two, carving out so much time to ask them, to sit down with them and ask them, how are you doing? How are things going? And I have to teach them, I have to train new employees when they come into my team for the first time, that it's okay to tell me the truth, that they won't get in trouble. In fact, I positively reinforce the behavior. The first time somebody gives me a piece of negative feedback, I like stop the damn show. Oh my God, that is so valuable. Thank you so much for telling me. That's amazing, right? Because I want to reprogram this behavior that they've learned elsewhere, that if there's a problem, you keep it to yourself. You don't tell the boss. You don't want them coming down on you. We have to actively work to reverse that and create an environment where not only do people feel comfortable, but they know they're actively going to be celebrated when they bring to the surface the problem. Because the reality is, as startup owners, you're never going to be able to see everything that happens in your business as it starts to scale and grow. You will naturally lose visibility. It's inevitable. And so either you can do what most people do, which is like tighten down, right? Look even harder, audit even harder, look under every single corner to try and find the problems, or we build a system. And the system looks like a culture of psychological safety that we can trust that when problems arise, they will be brought to the surface by the people closest to them. One of those is much more efficient than the other.
So Psychological safety is an interesting idea because I think about like my own business. There's people that they almost don't even care if they feel safe or not. They're going to tell you what they think.
Sure.
Like,
Yep.
I'm going to tell you to your face.
Yep.
I think there's this risk sometimes of someone that's in a position of authority in the business and they get the one loud person that is really opinionated and you create this like false sample size. This person's really loud, so everyone feels this way. Do you ever see that where people are like overvaluing a certain employee's perspective and like applying it to the whole group?
Yeah, 100%, right? That one person who is willing to speak their mind, you're only getting one narrative. And so you falsely assume that everybody must feel that way. Or like in the case of this client, their team was talking to them. And what their team was saying is, we want a raise. That's what their team said. We want a raise. What they weren't saying is, we feel overworked, burned out. We feel like we aren't trusted by our leadership. We aren't empowered or held autonomous in our own roles. They weren't saying any of that. What they were saying is, we want a raise, right? So again, even if your team is giving you that feedback, knowing and digging deeper into, is that the root cause, right? You want a raise. Tell me why. Why do you want a raise? Oh, because I feel like I'm doing 3 people's work. Okay, that's a different problem. We actually can't fix that with a raise because I could pay you more money and you're going to be just as burnt out and overwhelmed as you were last week, right? So it's about engaging in the conversation with your team and really, really actively taking the time to pull out of them and creating that space where I am literally sitting here until you give me critical feedback. I know it's not perfect right now. Tell me what could be better so we can work on it together, we can fix it. And then the final thing is like, and then back it up, right? I think that plenty of founders say, give me feedback. And maybe even one brave soul actually does. But then do you actually take action on that? Do you prove to your team with your actions that when you tell me something needs to be better, I will hear you, I will take it seriously, and I will fix it? Because otherwise, that's just a broken promise. The next time you say, give me feedback, they don't believe that that feedback actually means anything. So they're not going to tell you.
It's funny. I feel like so much of that boils down to being curious enough to go and dig. And I've found myself as the company has gotten bigger, not prioritizing taking the time, just get curious about what you're talking about, is asking kind of like secondary and tertiary questions, not just taking the first response at face value.
Sure.
Hearing that is like, shit, I feel overwhelmed with the idea of going and doing that.
Totally. And here's the grace I'll give you is like, as you grow and scale, it's not just you who needs to be doing this, it's all of your leadership, right? So every manager, in my mind, is responsible for uncovering the hidden problems within their department, for having that level of trust and that level of honesty and that level of psychological safety within their team. It will filter up. It will make its way up to you if it's important enough to grab your attention. But the reality is, it's not viable for you as one person who's already fucking busy to be taking the time to meet with every single person across your 80-person team and say, hey, what could be better? If there's, again, the system is that your managers are having that conversation regularly, not on a quarterly review, regularly with their team members every week, every other week. They're saying, here's where you're doing well. Here's where you have room for growth. Now, what am I doing well? What is the company doing well? And where do we have room for growth? And so that feedback loop is constantly being pulled out of the team and then filtered up if it's important enough. One person can only effectively manage between 5 to 8 people, because if you're managing that closely, if you're managing that effectively, you are pouring into those people. You're having those regular conversations with them. You're building that trust and safety. You can't do that with 25 people effectively.
Operationally, everyone wants their business to be a well-oiled machine.
Always.
Right? At the same time, human beings aren't machines. We all know that from like dealing with our people. And if people problems come with people, when you notice employee stress, what are the warning signs you're looking at to say, hey, there might be someone in the wrong place, or they might be going through something that's going to affect things operationally? How do you get curious about people problems or possible people problems?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I love that saying, business is simple, people make it complicated. And the reality is that your people are the single highest source of creativity, innovation, problem-solving progress in your business. They are also the highest source of risk, liability, confusion, chaos, right? And so we have to take the good with the bad. And I think the act of great management is learning how to extract the maximum good while mitigate bad to the max, right? And so what that looks like is, again, do you have regular feedback loops so that, for example, I have team members who will tell me about how their mental health is doing. month over month, when we check in, they feel safe enough to come to me and be like, it's been a really tough month. Here's what I'm struggling with. Here's how I worry it's showing up and affecting my work. Here's something happening in my personal life that I worry is affecting my work, or that is coming down the track that I worry is affecting my work, right? So again, have I created a strong enough container so that if they are struggling with something that I would never know and never see unless they told me, do they feel comfortable enough bringing that to the surface so that I can be made aware of it and I can support them as such, right? Because half of the shit that's slowing down our businesses is the stuff that we can't see, that we're not aware of, and that we will never, right? There's no screen monitoring software in the world that will tell you if your employee is depressed. And so how can you create that environment where those conversations are able to happen because they know they're going to get support as opposed to consequences?
I have another question for you. One of the things that as a leader I care about is flexibility. I care about that with work. Like, I want to be flexible with my work. I want to work when it makes sense and not work when it doesn't make sense. And with a leadership team, I feel like, especially when you've got a big org that's running, sometimes the problems aren't at a convenient time. And as you kind of take on those leadership roles, the business kind of demands flexibility. And so I try to give my team flexibility in return. When you're thinking about things like time off and time off policies, how do you structure that so that it's fair to the team? Because to me, it just changes on the role, right? Like some leadership roles, that might be a different thing than entry-level roles. How do you think about time off and time off policies?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we actually have an unlimited time off policy at my company, and I present that to every new employee. It's in the job description, and I present it on day one. But I present it very carefully. I present it like this. So at this company, we have an unlimited time off policy. What that means is very simply, no one's counting. No one's counting what days you take on. No one's counting what days you take off. You could work the weekends. You could take off a Monday. You get to work when and how allows you to get your best work done. And you are responsible for your role. You're responsible for the outcomes of your role, even when you're not in the office. What that means is that if you plan to take time off, you are responsible for making sure the work still gets done. So are you going to front load that work? What are you going to delegate? What are you going to catch up on when you get back? Have you communicated that to your team with enough proactive time for everybody to help carry the load and to be aware of what's going to happen when you step out? You're responsible for your role. So if you are the head of product and we're about to do a massive product launch, it's your responsibility to not take a vacation during those 2 weeks because that can't happen without you, right? So there's so much embedded in the unlimited time off policy around radical ownership, proactive communication, leaning on your team, and responsibility. Because the reality is if somebody takes 2 weeks off and their work doesn't get done, I will hold them just as accountable to that as if they were in the office and it didn't get done. At the end of the day, you own your role, whether you're on vacation or not.
Love that. Yeah, I think that's such a clean way to communicate it.
Yeah. One thing I've been thinking about is confirmation bias as leaders when it comes to hiring and how we all have the tendency to try and go out and find mini-me's.
Oh my God. I had the same thought today.
All of us. We all do it, right?
I hate it.
I know, it's such a pain in the ass. Freaking human bias, man.
I hate seeing my weaknesses like that.
Reflected back to you in an army of mini-me's.
And it seems like the danger is sometimes it's stuff that you shouldn't be tolerating in yourself, and you just end up tolerating it in your team.
Right? Like if you are trying to create a team where everybody thinks and acts and does exactly like you, then all of your weaknesses get compounded and magnified across the entire team. If everyone has to think like you, then no one can think better than you. If everyone should be making decisions exactly the way you would make decisions, then no one can make a better decision than you would make, right? We become the bottleneck of our business when we assume that we are the best at everything and success looks like a team that will do their role exactly the way we would do it.
There's a team member, we had a one-on-one, and she was asking me a question. She was saying, like, am I being too cautious? Like, I'm getting asked to do something and I feel like I'm telling everyone else to slow down. Like, am I holding something up? We do culture index. And so, like, one of the things that it was interesting is there's certain types of people, according to this, that are risk averse.
Right.
And, you know, it's a default. People can still take risks, whatever. I'm someone that my personality by default is risk averse.
That's interesting.
And what's interesting is I've looked around the rest of the team and look at everyone else's culture index. The vast majority are also risk averse.
Interesting.
And like, I'm not looking for risk averse people.
Right. Totally.
Right? And so we had this conversation about it. And as I was thinking, I was like, oh my gosh, like the whole team's kind of risk averse. And it's been interesting because I can see in some people, they've like coach themselves past it, and other people, they are still struggling with it. You said you've been thinking about it. Is it because of your business or other people you're coaching? Like, how is that coming up?
Yeah, the biggest place I see this is when it comes to hiring an operator, where CEOs are like, okay, I'm ready for my second in command. Therefore, I need somebody who's going to do exactly the job, exactly the way that I do it, so that I don't have to do it, right? But the fallacy in the thinking is, cool, but you're not the best operator for your business. You built yourself into a freaking corner. You made yourself the bottleneck because you don't know how to get out of that role. So if you just swap yourself for somebody else, you're just making somebody else the bottleneck. But there's still a bottleneck in the business. The operator's value is that they bring this totally new lens to the company, and they actually eliminate the bottleneck entirely. They figure out how to build a system and a team that can replicate your work without you and without anyone having to be that central point of progress for the business. And so we all know theoretically that diverse teams are stronger, right? A diversity of lenses, a diversity of risk tolerances, a diversity of backgrounds, a diversity of experiences. But when it goes to hiring, our confirmation bias kicks in, and we want to find the person who acts and thinks and is exactly like us. And so we end up undercutting the value of our people, because if we're either hiring or we're training them to do it the way we would do it. When really what we want is we want them to do it the way they would do it, but do it with the core values, do it with the work ethic, and do it with the strategic focus and context that we would bring into that role. That's what we're looking for. So when it comes to training, it's the difference between training somebody on what to think versus training them on how to think. And in every time a problem or a fire comes up in your business and your team comes to you and says, what do we do? How do you respond? Do you respond with, do this? Because that's telling them what to think. Or do you respond with, I don't know, what do you think we should do? And engage in the live coaching session that walks them through their own thought process to arrive at an outcome their way, as opposed to your way.
That's so funny. Why do we want our mini-me's?
Yeah.
Why do we want that?
Because I think human beings just naturally have an affinity for the people who look and speak and act like them. We're tribal beings.
We all want to look at ourselves at the Zoom call, right?
Literally. Not to call me out, dude, but damn. 100%.
Yeah.
100%. So I think knowing that there's a natural bias there, right? I don't think the answer is fight that. I don't think the answer is somehow rise above that. I think the answer is build that into the system. So when I'm going to hire a new role, I'm actively thinking about, how do I want this person to be different than me? What are the unique characteristics and competencies that I don't fucking have at all, but are going to allow this person to be more successful in the role than even I am? And I'm going out and I'm looking for that. We use personality tests like DISC, and I want a diversity of DISC profiles at the leadership level. If everybody starts looking the same, that's a problem. I will intentionally hire internationally or from different religions, different cultures, because I know that built into that are different lenses and perspectives. So I know my own confirmation bias. I know I'm going to fall victim to that. So how can I actively put padding around myself? How can I wrap that bias in bubble wrap so that it doesn't have the fallout that it otherwise would if it went unchecked?
Okay, I was going to ask you what you think the hardest role to hire for is.
Ooh.
I know you were going to say COO.
Totally.
So outside of a COO,
Okay.
what do you think the hardest thing to hire for is?
I mean, I think the hardest role to hire for are the roles where we're not the expert. Right?
Yeah.
So for me, I'm not a great salesperson. The hardest role to hire was sales. For most people, they're terrible at operations. And so the hardest role for them to hire is COO, because we don't know what to look for, again, when we're not using ourselves as the baseline. When we're saying, hey, this person has to somehow magically be way different and way better, but I don't know how, because I'm not different and I'm not better and I can't do the role to begin with. And so the hack to this is to tap into your network. When I went to go hire a salesperson, I asked a buddy of mine who's a killer closer to look at the skill assessments and help me determine who's got the raw sales ability to do what it takes, because I literally didn't know how to look for that, right? So there's ways of tapping into your network or using ChatGPT or whatever to help stress test your thinking when you're making the hires that you're least familiar with.
I have a hard time with sales rules too.
Yeah, they're tough, huh?
They're tough.
Yeah. And some people have really figured it out, but they tend to be awesome freaking salespeople.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because the lie I tell myself is like, oh, I know marketing, so like I can hire for sales. And it's not the same thing.
No, 100%. Or like, there's a reason that we only hire operators. And it's because while my hiring system is bomb and it works for every role, we are the best at hiring operators because we are operators. My whole team is operators. And it takes one to know one. When we see an exceptional operator, we can pick them out of a lineup because we've spent so much time immersed in that profile, studying that profile, know exactly what it takes to make somebody exceptional in that role. If you're feeling less than confident in a role that you need to hire for, find the expert. That person might already be on your team. They're probably in your network. Find the expert who's so familiar with that role that they could pick it out of a lineup just like that.
So that's good advice.
Mm.
I know when I haven't followed that before, like I remember someone gave me some advice and said, I don't know about that person. And I ignored him. I was like, no, we can make it work. But it's because he was a mini me and he was right. I was wrong.
There you go. I think we all have to learn the lesson. The question is, how many times do you have to learn the lesson before you start to implement? It's just checks and balances, right? Half of what operations is protecting the business from the CEO. The CEO's tendency of having 100 ideas that will whiplash the company until it moves nowhere at all. The CEO's tendency to not communicate their strategic vision. And so everyone is stumbling around blind because nobody knows where we're going, right? Every CEO has their strengths, has their brilliance. Every CEO has their weaknesses. It's the job of the operator and the self-aware CEO to identify what those weaknesses are and then put a systematic check and balance in place so that the company, again, gets to maximize all of the upside, but mitigate the downside that is natural with every single human being. The only issue is as founders, our weaknesses get magnified across the entire business. And so it's our responsibility to make sure that there are checks in place to protect our company from ourselves.